Well, I personally am just blown away by this meeting for two reasons, which are a bit orthogonal. One is as a just the quality of the technical presentations have just been off scale and totally interlinked with one another. And a lot of them wouldn't have even been. I certainly don't think they were predictable a year ago, but even maybe 6 months ago for many of them. And then things like what we just saw, this interoperation of OSG, Internet 2, and PRP ones, and then they're all different kinds of. They're like bananas and pears and cherries or something. But it's a logical structure. And then the other thing is, of course, just all of you, the intricate fabric that's being woven here. Just think of where you're all from. I mean, there's there's CNIC, Quilt, Internet 2, there's EPSCoR estates, there's MSIs, there's, as somebody mentioned, a lot younger set of folks at this meeting than there was a year ago, which is actually very good because us old people wouldn't be able to navigate the new software space as well as so many of the young people who seem to just be like fish in water. That's just the way the world is, of course. So, but I'd like to get a sense from all of you. I've known a number of you have asked, are we going to do a third of these? So I thought that would be one thing I'd like to get from you, just ideas. But then I'd like to hand it over to Inder and Anna to get your thoughts as well. Let's get some input from both. Anyone? Or are we just going to be shy? Yes. Jim? Let's see. Marla, you're going to run mic or something? How did...
Yeah, well, I hope there is a third, and I think students should be included in the future. Harvey would say high school students as well, but undergraduates, and I think NSF would support that too. This is a great workforce development opportunity, I think.
Yeah, so I've been impressed by what I observe among brilliant young students, and I don't think, I come from an institution where they're less uncommon than some other places, but I think they're from everywhere. And I think that's what's going to make NRP succeed, both because these are the guys who are going, and women who will do the work, but also because those are the people that convince others. So, for example, when we talk about interns, I'm looking for the ringleaders of interns. If you challenge them, just put out an announcement of a grand challenge. Some of them will just show up, and if 10 of them show up and it turns out that 3 are really in the class we're looking for, then you're a long way to succeeding.
So, of course, we should do more of this. But let me just give you an idea of the value that I'm taking back to my campus from this particular meeting. So, I have made the acquaintance of people who have brand new CC Star awards, and I am forming a partnership with them to make sure that they don't make the mistakes that I made from my grant 2 years ago. I am working across institutions with other smaller campuses to form partnerships about virtual consultancies and being able to do science engagement not only on my campus but on CSU campuses and around California to really boost the participation in PRP as a whole. And I have been approached on a number of occasions and given contact information for people to say, I've heard you mention this, and let's talk because we share your concerns and I think we can help. And these aren't people selling me products. These are people with experience and knowledge and expertise that I can tap into. So it's tremendously valuable for me to come to these things because the partnerships and the people network is what I walk away with. Oh, and I also have a Fionette in my backpack.
I think one of the themes that I've heard over and over again is as impressive as the technology is and the advancements that are being made on the technical front, I think that the human networking and the human connections are probably even more valuable. And so whatever we can do to try and keep the communication friction-free and frequent among this community, we ought to try and do. So a simple thing, can we distribute the participants list with emails?
Yes. We didn't specifically ask you if you were willing to have your emails shared, so that's why it hasn't been shared. Yeah.
From what's that? Tom, why don't you come up here and look at their pretty faces? Because there's lots of smiles. You're just getting the back of their heads.
You want your picture.
We have a picture of all of you.
Let's see. As we go forward, one of the things that seems to be emerging is there's a structural notion at the networking level that between the Quilt, ESNet, and Internet 2, you've got a kind of logical basis for the NRP at the networking level. And then we're seeing, from what we just saw with the talk we just had, along with what Alex has just been funded by NSF, there seems to be a logical sort of data a layer on top of that. And that brings in organizations like OSG and so forth. Now, all of these have meetings. And so one notion is, in this notion of distributing, is instead of just a meeting once a year, because actually at the rate this process is unfolding, I think having multiple opportunities with different folks naturally attracted to different meetings and so forth make a certain amount of sense as well. So adding it to a Quilt meeting and lots of Internet 2 meetings, ESNet meetings, OSG meetings. I think I would actually addressed all those. So there may be, there may be other ones as well. But what anybody think about that? Because I think, from what I can see, this is one of those up and to the right things. Whether it's exponential or not is a technical question about something that looks like that. But it's growing very rapidly and broadly. And it's also got the characteristic that most of these things that I've lived through do, is that there are early adopters and there are late followers. And so even within an organization, any of these organizations, you've got, you've got your Great Plains network, and then you've got others that may not have those technical folks and so forth. So there's a lot of cross-teaching that's capable in a situation like that that actually makes the whole thing move forward. Yeah.
Hello, Glenn Reichert, US Ignite. I was very heartened by Manish's comment about cyber infrastructure is now going to be thought about taking down to the device level. And that means it really intersects with some of the work we do at US Ignite and communities around the country and working on smart communities, which are largely data-driven. And if you would go and take the smart community paradigm and lay it onto a number of the talks here, you would see that they need to store massive amounts of data. They need to be able to interchange it. They need to be able to process it to see what's happening in their neighborhoods, how they can improve healthcare, how they can improve transportation, and so forth. And of course, there is a Smart and Connected Community Cross-Directorate program at the National Science Foundation, which is growing reasonably rapidly. And of course, also, as we heard on the first day, harnessing the data revolution that has some heavy investments. I'm very heartened by that and think that there's a significant opportunity to extend what we already know about cyber infrastructure to a community that has not yet experienced that, but really could benefit a great deal by experiencing that.
Right. I mean, this whole, when Manish said that NSF now regards, high-end computing to include the edge, that's a fairly radical statement. I mean, it's from a policy point of view, and it's a one that's quite visionary because it understands that there is going to be totally distributed, not just in computing, but intelligence from the edge devices all the way through massive central facilities, which we heard discussed as well here.
I think that was a good point. Ken's other people say things that they would like to see in the third NRP workshop that they didn't see, or based on this meeting, they think, oh, it will be really good if this other thing can be added on.
Jerry?
Yeah, someplace else so I don't have to host. That would be a first, or at least I'll make sure projectors work next year. So I was reflecting on some things that we had last year that we lost. We had more agencies last year. We had NIH and NASA. They aren't in attendance. And we lost our vendor panel. And I think we need to think carefully about the role that vendors play in this and giving them a voice, given the partnerships that we have across the continuum.
We did have, I was actually very pleased to see that we had AWS and Google, the cloud vendors, because with Kubernetes, as I said, that's the fundamental change, is it sort of melted the difference between clusters, supercomputers, laptops, clouds, and that's a permanent change. One of the things that occurred to me was if you go back to I guess the mid-90s maybe, Beowulf clusters. Does that ring a bell? And before Linux, and there was all of this down in the weeds stuff and competing stuff and everything else, and then it just sort of went through a phase transition, and then after that it was all about using clusters, and it wasn't about it just moved up the stack fundamentally, right? And I think that's where we are. That's what the Kubernetes and the distributed storage stuff is, I think, all about. Is it's moved us up the stack, which allows for a lot higher level questions to be asked. And I know Harvey will probably want to say something, as he should, about intelligence in the network as well. It's not just at the edge or in Senator Harvey.
Actually, I can say more than that because I learned something during this meeting. There are so many inputs. So I realized that some of the problems we're having are sort of fundamental between two worlds, actually. One is the internet, which needs to remain stateless. And so all the people who talked about enablement and so on were assuming a stateless internet, even with rather considerable degree of data intensiveness. The others are headed for constraints. Once you hit the constraints on your infrastructure, things become very stateful. Without getting again into that discussion, the problem is then, how do the worlds of stateless and stateful coexist? I had a conversation with Rod from Siena about what I labeled adaptive predictive provisioning at layer 1. And so here's the idea. It's that if we can define the boundary between the stateless world, which has a very dynamic limit across a topology, and the stateful world in which people are interacting with the network, are trying to use up the rest of the infrastructure, as long as the boundary stays away from the stateless part, so that the stateless part never feels the wall, then maybe that will succeed. So I took this away from this meeting. It's a very challenging concept. It's very new, but I think it's a way that the stateless and stateful worlds can coexist.
Very deep, very deep. So Larry, if you don't mind, I wanted to also get some feedback from the people who run end sites like university CIOs, and from their perspective of this workshop, and not just the people who run networks, and would like to hear what they have to say, both from third, what kind of input would be useful for to them as well. If there are any volunteers. Okay.
Anybody?
Mala?
Anybody?
Here we go, down here in the front.
Thank you. First of all, thank you everybody who made this possible. It's really been fascinating. I would like to see more use cases of how scientists are making use of the network. A lot of people referred to them, but I'd love to have a panel of working scientists talking about how this was able to transform their work, and then that would be a resource I would take back to campus to show scientists who, I think there's a big gap between this idea, they know the world is changing, they know all this data stuff is out there, and they're trying to figure out how to apply it in their own scientific practice. And I think more resources that would help us there would generate the demand, and for me would give me the ability to go out and get the resources I need to make it happen, because I can demonstrate the impact that it's going to have, as opposed to build it and we hope they'll come.
Why don't you go ahead and identify yourself?
Michael Berman from Cal State University.
So thanks very much for that. You know, I couldn't agree more, because it's the thing that keeps me up at night about this whole thing. I mean, it's everything is coming up roses, right? Except as a scientist, a lifetime scientist, application scientist, you know, and I go back to when we started the Supercomputer Center, the real issue when well, I'll just give you 2 data points on this, because the phenomenon is the same each time. When the NSF Supercomputer Center started in 1985, there were roughly a couple of hundred, let's call it, supercomputer users. That is, people who'd use vector machines, something like that. Within 5 years, there were 50,000 that had logged on to one or another of the 5 NSF centers. And so, you know, you were looking for who needed a vector from an application point of view. When Mosaic came out in 93, the X, and then 94, Windows and Apple, you know, there were maybe 100 websites in the world, maybe a couple hundred. In fact, we reviewed every new one every day in what's new. Mark did, and so, you know, I remember that very well, because I used to give the first demos that anybody in industry had ever seen, for the people who think that all the stuff comes from industry. In those days, it didn't, and nowadays it's very different, I think. But we had the Honolulu Community College Dinosaur Museum. We had the Illinois State Fair. We had the Cambridge University Coffee Pot. And I was giving us first live demo with 56 kilobit networking to 50 CIOs or CTOs, and they all want to know, what the hell is this World Wide Web going to be good for? And so I said, well, let me show you the examples of people using it. And afterward, they came up to me and said, you pointy-headed professors, there's obviously no business use of this World Wide Web thing of yours. And these were Fortune 50 CIOs, CTOs. Yeah, well, but I'm just saying those experiences reminded me that actually, if you know, what I was taken away from is the number of scientific examples we got with the OSG thing, with Rob Gardner's talk, with a number of the others. They were kind of sprinkled in there, but they were more than I knew about. Writing reports with Tom Defani to the NSF about what the PRP has done. That's gonna be our next quarter report, is what people talked about here. So we need it, but you'd also have to be a little bit patient with the adoption rate. It's a diffusion effect. So, Jerry?
So I always feel in this meeting like I sort of have to confess that I'm a CIO from a central IT
Oh,
organization.
you are a CIO.
And I think that probably is for good reason. There's an inherent tension in what we're doing and some of the enterprise scaling, but I continue to be deeply concerned that unless NSF does a refresh of the CC Star Awards, this transition from experiment to production is something that we're not talking a lot about. And I think if we do one of these next year, it would be really great to have some worked examples of where the experiment transitioned over to something that was more sustainable than the researcher who invented it. That's a secret sauce that I don't think we yet understand. And it's going to be really important to have best practices that help us make sure that we're focused on that and know the right things to do.
So just to translate that for those of you who aren't deeply engaged in NSF grant getting, are there any of you? Anyway, the CC Star program under Kevin Thompson has about 6 years under its belt, and most of those awards were 3-year awards. So most of the several hundred awards are over, and that money that was given in one pulse to those campuses is come and gone. And we saw with Shaw. How long was your support as a CC cyber engineer? 2 years. Pretty soon, right? So it turns out going to do just fine. But many of the campuses that had these short-term NSF awards for some of the most important blue people like Shaw, are they going to be kept on, for instance, or how's that going to work? So I think that's a very good point, and we need to make that to the agencies, not just NSF. Wendy.
So I wanted to just make a comment on the Campus Cyber Infrastructure Program. And as many of you know, part of after you submit those grants, you have to sort of say to the NSF that you're going to support that infrastructure. So I know for the CI engineer grants that what they wanted was a commitment from someone within the administration at the universities that they were going to support that position for 2 or 3 years. And what they're trying to do is integrate that institutional support for the cyber infrastructure as well as for the people within the institutions, as well as get that collaboration between the CIOs and the researchers in the campus, and this program has been very successful. I believe there probably will be another round next year. And what's interesting is that supporting people and infrastructure in this manner is not always typical for the NSF. For those of us who have been in the field for a long time, we always see waves of these. So there was the VB&S connections, there was the HPC or HPNCs, and now the campus cyber infrastructure is sort of an interesting version of that. So the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a plug in for the CC Star and CI/CI/PI workshop that Jen Leisure and I are the PIs for, that are going to be hosted by the University of Maryland. So I don't know if Tripty's still here somewhere. Thank you, Tripty. So we're going to be in the hotel there. And so one of the things that we're looking at doing is having a discussion conversation about these sustainability issues. So our theme this year is sustainability, and we are inviting people who have had expired awards to actually come to the workshop and be on some of the panels to talk about both the benefits as well as the challenges in terms of integrating these technologies, this infrastructure, and these people into your campus environment, and has it been successful? And one of the things that we found for this workshop, there are a number of program managers from the NSF that are there, but they really want to hear both the benefits and the challenges so that they can refine the programs and do some changes in terms of funding so that we can capitalize on this momentum that we have.
So if I could respond a little bit, this is Dane Scown, North Dakota State. I run the Supercomputing Center in North Dakota State. Jerry, I think the thing that you're alluding to is that we tend to have a desire to go very rapidly from research to operational stability. And we really underestimate the D part of R&D. And we are squarely in development. And that is a very important, it's a very difficult, and it deserves to be taken seriously as a phase in putting out cyber infrastructure. So I think one thing we can do is just point out that this is a legitimate phase, and we are there. And it's not going to be 3 months. It hopefully won't be 3 years, but it's going to be somewhere in between. And I think the other thing that as a center, having done this a number of times in a number of different communities, one of the things that has been tremendously valuable has been the OSG-like approach to things that we used to call stunts, where you would get people together and try and achieve some heroic advancement or some deliverable. And you would assemble the coalition of the willing, you would pull things together in resources. There would be some core that would persist after, and it usually grew a little bit in this process. But depending on how successful the operations went, a good portion of the resources would go away. And that should not be viewed as failure. That is a learning experience for the people that come. And I think if we can take along the spirit of the 3-day training that was at the beginning of this, where I think that people did an excellent job of presenting in a way that I feel like I could almost go and give that training back in my institution. It was so well prepared. And we went away with a gift that we could go off and continue to use on immediate feedback and gratification. All of that is just excellent strategy, I would say.
Well, you know, supercomputing, for instance, is one of the opportunities every year where this kind of thing, and where's Joe Mambretti back in the back, you know, he's a good example of every year doing a heroic thing that is on a scale that hadn't been done before. Harvey is always organizing the same kind of thing. Those things are really important. One of the things in this day and age of video, everything's on YouTube type of thing, is recording the workshop and the Kubernetes day on, you know, in digestible chunks, and then getting that up on something like YouTube, so that we don't have to have the same poor people giving lectures everywhere, is something that's very cheap and easy to do, and so we'll commit to helping make that happen. Flash mobs, you get that?
Flash Fiona mobs, that's a scary thought.
Let's see.
Harvey, did you want?
I want to get you out of here, but is there another? Did you over here? Yeah.
You were talking about supercomputing and SciNet. That's one thing we do. Supercomputing SciNet today has a lot of what Harvey does or Joe does in SciNet. I think we could also build much smaller level things that go on at SciNet and at the home institutions and do those in real time. The second thing, this conference is something that I've missed for like 15 years back. We used to have things called seminars in academic computing.
we used to have a thing, we used to have our networking meetings where we would get Internet 2, ESNet, and other people together. Having that networking thing was very much like this, and we have not had that for a long time. So the SciNet thing, the joint text thing, all of those kinds of things are stuff that we have missed, and we've gone on to the internet plumbers of what we've created today on campus. We have to get back to the internet, the network innovators, or we're going to become like our mothers. You know, we will be our own network mother at some point.
I'm still trying to parse that, but okay, and the pack.
Me too.
Thank you.
So Ben Rogers, University of Iowa. So this has been a very thought-provoking couple of days for me. I came trying to understand really what NRP was about. And I won't say that I fully understand all aspects, but I have a much better perspective than I did when I came. Two pieces that are bandwidth. That's, I think, the challenge for me. I think there's a lot of very interesting technologies here. And I think that the social side is really important. But I'm struggling to figure out exactly how I invest from my team's perspective into all of these new technologies. And, you know, sort of trying to pick the winners, because we heard about quite a few different technologies. And so I think that that's one piece from a campus perspective that I'm trying to understand and trying to be judicious about where we invest at. I think the other one, which is perhaps maybe more for me as a research computing lead, I think that the community aspects and the different types of people that are getting connected, Dana talked about, you know, the libraries, the security people, the network people, the research computing, the researchers. I think that's very important that we have that connectivity. But what I've seen over the last couple of years is a lot of growth in different kinds of meetings. So to your point, you know, how many meetings can I actually attend, and you know, which ones are going to be the most effective for connecting our communities? And I don't have answers on either of these, but those are some of the high level things I'm walking away thinking about. So.
Yep. Marla?
Hey, as from a sustainability perspective, I've heard people say that faculty want everything for free. And yeah, but also I write grants and I put in budget items for stuff. I actually bought a DTN for Washington State University, which is now on the PRP, right? So like if there's a way for you to tell me how much money to spend where I can add to this resource like I do for our condominium model cluster at Clemson, I'm more than happy to do that. And also like to take a moment, a kumbaya moment to thank everybody here for all of these systems you've built that I and my students that have graduated and you know they're off doing great things. Thank you for building these things because I mean I couldn't do my science without them. I truly mean that.
Okay, so I talked to Inder and Anna, and they have agreed with me that any of you who have more thoughts on any of this, or you want to volunteer to do something, or you want to have a meeting, or anything that comes to mind, just email us. And what we're going to do is go off and contemplate all this input and decide how to move forward. But let me just get a show of hands. How many people would like to see a meeting of this caliber, this scale, a year from now? Okay. That's very good input. Well, thanks to all of you for taking the time to work together. The thing I got to say is, having, like I say, had 4 decades of these, the thing that was really, you can tell about a meeting like this is at the end of the day, when you let people out, everybody is still talking to each other. The energy in this room, the people who are talking to people who they didn't necessarily know when they came to the meeting, and that they're still doing it at the end of multiple days, is an indicator that something special is really happening here. We're really building something that's going to persist. So thanks to all of you.
And can I add a couple things? Thanks to Jerry for hosting. Your team and everybody did a great job.
And I would like to add my thanks to Mala and the program committee and Louis and the team as well that from Scenic that helped all of this.
And Leanne, who did a great job, who I don't think is here, said if you are not going to keep your name tag, there's a box out on the table, and she'll recycle them and reuse them. So.
And Anna has one thing to say.
Well, actually, two.
Two. Make it three.
Thanks to all of you also for staying for this. This is really important, and definitely let us know a little bit more. But I want to thank you, Larry. But I also want to thank Inder. Working with the two of you and has been a wonderful opportunity, not only as a, personally, it's been really great, but I think our organizations, now with the quilt and with the regionals and the great things we were able to do from a year ago where we were and now where we are and now where we need to go. And I'm excited. I think we are excited collectively about now the work at hand. We have many challenges, but I really appreciate how everybody came together to talk about those. We can build all these great networks and things, but I think it's also the social networks and that human network. And this is indicative, so it's really invigorating. And on behalf of Internet too, I also want to reiterate our commitment to this effort, working together with our partners as well. So thank you, and really appreciate your input. Keep it coming.
Thanks.